The sun hung low over the dusty plains as the town gathered near the wooden platform at the edge of the market square. Boots stomped, hats tilted, and eyes narrowed with a mix of curiosity and cruelty. It wasn't cattle or land up for sale this time. It was a girl, silent, barefoot, and barely grown. Her dress was worn, her face smudged with dust, but her posture was upright. She didn't cry. She didn't plead. She just stood there, staring straight ahead like she'd already left her body behind. The auctioneer's voice sliced through the air like a whip. Healthy. Can cook. No baggage. Who'll start the bidding? Laughter echoed somewhere in the back. A few men called out lazy numbers. Others just watched with hard eyes. She didn't react. Not when someone called her trouble in a pretty dress. Not even when someone spat near her feet. She had learned by now. Showing pain only made them press harder. Then, from the edge of the crowd, a man stepped forward. Tall, broad-shouldered, and silent as a grave. A dark hat shaded most of his face, but his presence was heavy. The kind of man people moved out of the way for without realizing why. He didn't ask questions. Didn't look her up and down like others had. He just raised 2 fingers. The auctioneer faltered for breath, then nodded. Sold. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. That's Daniel Cross. Didn't think he'd ever buy anyone. Still grieving her, ain't he? What's he want with a girl? The whispers grew as the girl stepped off the block and walked toward him, her feet steady but her heart pounding. He didn't reach out, just handed her a folded blanket and turned toward the waiting wagon. The ride out of town was quiet. The wagon creaked. The horses snorted, and dust rose in the golden evening light. She sat on the edge of the wooden bench, clutching the blanket like a shield. He drove without speaking, eyes on the road, jaw tight. She stole glances at him, trying to guess what kind of man he really was. Rough hands, sun-worn skin, and eyes like distant storms. He looked like a man who had nothing left to lose. After nearly an hour, they reached a wide stretch of land, a ranch that sprawled under the fading light like something out of a painting. The house wasn't grand, but it was well kept. Fences were mended. The barn stood solid, and a line of chickens clucked near the porch. She expected him to say something, explain her place, her duties, his rules. Instead, he just climbed down, tied the horses, and said, without turning, "You can sleep in the spare room. There's food on the stove." She hesitated. "That's it?" she asked, voice low. It was the first thing she'd said all day. He looked over his shoulder briefly. "I didn't buy you to hurt you." Then he walked inside. The warmth of the kitchen surprised her. It smelled faintly of bread and wood smoke. A bowl of stew sat covered on the table, still warm. She ate silently, glancing around. Everything was clean, not fancy, but cared for. She found the spare room, small, plain, with a narrow bed and a window that looked out over open land. That night, lying on a mattress softer than any she'd known in years, she stared at the ceiling. No chains, no bruises, just silence and the slow creak of a settling house. Her chest felt tight, not with fear, but something stranger. Relief, but she didn't dare trust it yet. Out on the porch, the cowboy sat with a cigarette, staring out at the stars. He wasn't sure why he'd done it. Just knew when he'd seen her standing up there, head high, eyes hollow. Something cracked open in him, something he thought he'd buried with her. And inside, the girl, sold like property, whispered into the dark, "At least it's over." But neither of them knew it was only just beginning. The morning air was crisp when she stepped out onto the porch. The ranch was quiet, the kind of silence that didn't feel peaceful, more like the kind that had forgotten how to make noise. Everything was in order. The fence posts were upright, the water trough full, and the chickens already scratching at the earth. It was the first place she'd been in years that wasn't falling apart. And yet it felt cold. Not the kind that came from weather, but the kind that seeped from the walls of the house with too many ghosts. Inside, she found him in the kitchen, sipping black coffee at the table. No greetings, no eye contact, just a nod at the stove. "There's more if you want it." She poured herself a cup, sat across from him. The table stretched longer than necessary, and the space between them felt deliberate. After long silence, he spoke. "You'll have work here, same as anyone. No free rides." He didn't sound harsh, just factual. "You'll cook, clean, tend to the chickens. Maybe help in the barn later. I don't expect more than that. I don't want more than that." His eyes finally met hers, unreadable. "You'll earn your keep. I'm not your owner." She nodded, tightly. "Fair enough." He stood, gathering his hat from the hook by the door. "If you want to leave, you can. You're not locked in. But out here, alone, there ain't many places to go." His voice softened, barely. "I won't hurt you, but don't expect kindness I don't got." As he walked out the door, she felt a strange mixture of relief and disappointment. She hadn't expected warmth. She didn't even want it. But something about the wall he kept up made her feel like a stranger in her own skin. Later that day, she explored the house a bit. The rooms were neat and functional. Nothing fancy, but everything had its place. The pantry was full. The linens were clean. It was a man's house, efficient, quiet, and untouched by anything soft. In one room, what she guessed was his, she paused in the doorway. A single framed photograph sat on a shelf. A woman, smiling, sunlight in her hair. She didn't need to ask who she was. The ache in his silence already told her enough. She backed away without touching anything. In the afternoon, she began her chores. The dishes, the sweeping, gathering eggs from the coop. Her hands moved out of habit, like her body remembered what it meant to survive, even when her mind didn't want to. The motions kept her from thinking too much. About the way she'd been sold. About the way no one in the crowd had looked at her like a person. About the man who had once promised her marriage and left her with nothing but shame and unpaid debt. That night, she sat on the edge of her bed, brushing dust from her skirt. The house creaked as the wind moved through the boards. She could hear the faint shuffle of boots from the other side. He was still awake, pacing maybe or thinking. The quiet between them was thick, but not heavy. It felt like both of them were holding something back, unsure if the other could carry it. She looked down at her hands, blistered already from scrubbing floors, and whispered to no one, "At least I'm not in chains anymore." For the first time in years, she slept without fear of someone coming to the door. And in the next room, the cowboy stared at the old photo a while longer, then turned it face down. The days slipped into each other like pieces of fabric stitched in silence. Morning came early. She'd rise before the sun, tie her hair back, and light the stove. The smell of coffee filled the kitchen before either of them spoke a word. She cooked breakfast, always simple: eggs, bread, beans. And he'd eat quietly, nodding once in thanks before heading out to tend the horses or fix a fence. In those early hours, she found a strange rhythm. There was something grounding in routine. Sweeping dust from the floors, washing clothes in cold water, scrubbing old stains from the table. It didn't feel like servitude. It felt like a life she could control, even if only in the way she folded a shirt or lined up jars in the pantry. He never interfered. He barely spoke. His words were tools, used only when necessary. Saddles loose. Dinner's burning. Storms coming. Not cruel, not warm, just sparse. Still, he didn't hover. He let her be, which was more than most had ever offered. The animals became her comfort, feeding chickens in the early fog, patting the mule on its stubborn head, brushing the barn cat off the windowsill as it tried to steal her bread. Out here, the land responded only to care and effort. It asked no questions about who you were, only what you could do, and that suited her just fine. One afternoon, while mopping the wooden floor, she found herself humming, just a simple tune, something from childhood, a lullaby her mother used to sing. She hadn't thought of it in years, but her mouth moved without asking permission. As she hummed, she sensed movement behind her. She looked up. He was standing in the doorway, one boot resting against the frame, arms folded, not speaking, just listening. His eyes were shadowed by the brim of his hat, unreadable as always. For a moment, she froze, unsure if she'd broken some silent rule. But he simply nodded once and walked away. She kept humming until the mop dried. That night, as she folded laundry near the fire, she noticed something on the corner of the table. A pair of gloves, thick leather, worn but warm. Her size. She hadn't asked for them, hadn't even said aloud that her fingers were blistered from wringing wet clothes. But he'd noticed. She turned slowly toward the kitchen. He wasn't there. The house was quiet again. She picked up the gloves gently, like they might vanish if touched too hard. No note, no explanation, just a silent gesture. She pressed the gloves to her chest and sat down on the wooden bench, letting herself breathe. For the first time since she'd arrived, her shoulders didn't feel like they were bracing for the next blow. Later, as she lay in bed, she caught herself smiling into the darkness. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but it was something close. The town was dusty and alive with noise as their wagon creaked down the main street. Children darted past horses, merchants haggled with worn-out ranchers, and the bell above the general store clanged with every swinging door. She sat beside him, her hands folded tightly in her lap, eyes low. It was her first visit since the auction, and already she could feel the stares clinging to her skin like dust. Whispers followed them like shadows. Women paused their gossip, just long enough to widen their eyes. Men nodded cautiously to Cowboy, but side-eyed her like a mystery they wanted solved. As they walked to the store, she heard it, soft, sharp, meant to be overheard. Replaced her already, did he? Didn't think he'd move on at all. Guess she must cook real good. She pretended not to hear, but the sting burned deep. Her fingers trembled as she picked up a sack of flour. She wasn't trying to replace anyone. She didn't even know who her was. But the weight of a dead woman's ghost seemed to press into her back with every glance. Then came her, a sharp-featured woman in a green shawl, eyes like daggers, voice dipped in honey cruelty. She stepped too close. "So, you're the new one. Looks young enough to be your daughter," she said to the cowboy, voice raised just enough. "Or is she just a warm body to fill the silence?" The woman smiled thinly and turned, expecting him to say nothing, as he usually did. But this time he didn't stay silent. He stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of the girl. "She's not yours to measure," he said, voice low but firm, "and you don't get to speak about her." The woman's smirk wavered. A silence rippled outward like a stone dropped in a still pond. Then she walked off, stiff-backed and bitter. The girl stood frozen for a moment. The noise returned slowly. The creak of the floorboards, the click of coins, but something inside her had shifted. They loaded the wagon in silence and rode home with only the sound of hooves and wind between them. But inside her chest, her heart thudded louder than it had in weeks. That evening, as she stirred stew in the quiet kitchen, she looked at him across the table. He was sharpening a tool, eyes focused. "Why me?" she asked softly, barely more than a whisper. He looked up, surprised by the question. For a moment, he said nothing, then leaned back in his chair. "Because you didn't break," he said. "Not on that block, not after." She swallowed hard. The words settled deep, both heavy and warm. No one had ever seen her strength before. Only her silence, her poverty, her past. They ate together in that soft stillness, not as master and servant, not even as strangers, but as two people who had been bruised by life and were, somehow, still standing. And for the first time, the house didn't feel quite so cold. The wind howled against the walls that night, and the skies tore open with thunder. Rain pelted the roof like falling nails, and the lights flickered once, twice, then went out completely. Silence filled the dark house, broken only by the distant growl of the storm. He lit the old oil lamp and placed it on the hearth as she entered the room, arms wrapped around herself for warmth. The fire had been lit earlier, and its glow now danced across the wooden floor. Without a word, he motioned to the chair near the flames. She sat. They stayed quiet for a long while, listening to the storm's fury. The fire cracked. He stared into it like it might offer answers to things he hadn't asked in years. Finally, she broke the silence. "My parents died in a fire," she said quietly. "I was 15. He didn't turn his head, but his hands stilled. She went on, her voice almost flat. "Their debts followed me. Our land was taken. I tried to work, tried to survive. But I was too young, too alone. A man offered to help me, Said he'd marry me, protect me. She gave a bitter laugh. He sold me instead. The cowboy's jaw tightened. Still, he said nothing. Not yet. I remember standing there, she added, voice cracking, feeling like I wasn't even a person anymore, just something to be taken, used. He finally turned, his eyes catching the firelight, and spoke softly. That day at the auction, you didn't flinch. That's what I saw. She blinked, surprised. You saw strength. He gave a slow nod. And hurt, but not broken. The fire popped loudly, as if adding its voice to the conversation. Then he leaned back, sighing deeply. She was a preacher's daughter. He said his own turn now. Said she'd wait for me. I left to build the ranch, make a home. Came back, and she was married to the banker's son. Her eyes softened. I'm sorry. I was too proud to show it hurt. Spent years in silence, thinking that was strength. He glanced at her. Turns out silence could be a cage, too. She smiled faintly, not out of amusement, but understanding. 2 different paths, 2 different scars, but somehow they recognized each other's wounds. The fire flickered, its warmth wrapping around them. Their eyes met for a second longer than before. He chuckled softly at a memory, something about a mule that kicked the fence post clear off. And to his surprise, she laughed. Really laughed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't forced. But it was real. It filled the room more than the fire ever could. The storm raged outside, but inside, something had shifted. A crack in the armor, a soft place carved out from shared pain. Not love, not yet, but connection. And in that quiet, flickering room, for the first time, neither of them felt truly alone. The days began to soften. The sun still rose over dry hills and stubborn grass, but something inside the ranch house had changed. She started with little things. A vase of wildflowers on the windowsill, faded but bright against the old wood. Then came curtains she stitched by hand, softening the sharp edges of the home silence. He didn't say much about it, but he noticed. When he'd come in from the fields, the house no longer felt like just walls and a roof. It felt lived in, like it had a heartbeat again. She found satisfaction in the work, not just cooking or cleaning, but shaping the place with her presence. She baked extra loaves of bread and pies, wrapping them in cloth and sharing them with passing ranchers or lonely neighbors. Some were surprised, others hesitant, but none refused her kindness. Word spread. The quiet girl the cowboy brought home had a gentle touch and a strong spirit. When a young boy from a nearby homestead fell sick with fever, she arrived with herbs and cool cloths. The mother wept in relief. The child recovered. He stood in the doorway that evening, watching her wipe the child's forehead, her brows furrowed in focus, her hands steady. Something in his chest stirred, something warm, unfamiliar, and a little frightening. The next day, while she swept the front porch, he called her name, not girl, not you, but her name. She looked up, surprised. He just nodded and said, supper was good last night. It was the smallest praise, but it lit something inside her. She had found rhythm now, tending to animals, humming while she worked, opening the windows to let the air in. Once, he caught her dancing barefoot in the kitchen while waiting for bread to rise. She froze, embarrassed, but he only grunted and then, unbelievably, smiled. That evening, they sat on the porch as the sun dipped low. The sky turned gold, and the earth glowed warm. He rocked slowly in his chair, boots dusty, arms crossed. She brought out 2 cups of tea, her own blend. He took a sip, then looked at her, really looked. This place, he said slowly, voice low and rough, is better with you in it. She didn't reply, but her breath caught for a moment, and she turned her face toward the wind so he wouldn't see the way her eyes filled. It was just after noon when the dust trail rose from the main road. She saw it first from the kitchen window, a lone rider on a dark horse, moving fast. Her hands froze on the dough she was kneading. Something about the shape of that man, the way he rode, made her stomach knot with old fear. He dismounted before the dust had settled, hat tilted low, a crooked smirk on his face, the same face that had once promised to marry her, and then sold her debts instead. Her pass stood on the porch. Well, he drawled. Didn't expect to find you playing house with a cowboy. She tried to close the door, but he shoved it open with ease. You owe me, he said. You still carry my name on paper. Come back now, and I'll forget the money. The cowboy appeared in the doorway from the barn, wiping grease off his hands. He didn't speak at first, just looked at the man, then at her, seeing the terror in her eyes. This man bothering you? He asked flatly. He thinks he owns me, she whispered, her voice shaking. The stranger laughed. Bought her fair and square. She ran before paying her way. The cowboy stepped between them. She's not going anywhere. The other man squared his shoulders, ready for a fight. What followed was fast, brutal. Fists flew, boots scraped the dirt, and the stranger ended up face first in the dust, bleeding from the lip and holding his ribs. Get off my land, the cowboy growled. Next time you ride in, you won't walk out. The man limped to his horse and spat. You'll regret this, he hissed, before galloping off into the dry horizon. She stood frozen in the doorway, trembling. The moment the stranger was gone, her knees gave out. She sank to the floor, tears coming fast, fists clenched against her chest. I ruin everything I touch, she whispered. Wherever I go, trouble follows. He knelt beside her, calloused hand reaching out slowly. Gently, he took her hand in his. You fix everything you touch, he said. This place, me, you brought it all back to life. She looked at him, eyes wet, breath shaking. He didn't let go of her hand. That night, for the first time, she didn't eat alone in the kitchen. They shared a quiet dinner by lantern light. The storm had passed, but something new had begun. Weeks had passed since the storm of her past had come and gone. The days were quiet again, but something had changed, not just in the way the ranch felt, but in the way he looked at her. There was warmth now in his eyes, a softness in his voice when he called her name. She spent her mornings tending the garden she had planted, her afternoons baking bread or stitching curtains in the sunlit kitchen. The house no longer felt like a shelter. It felt like a home. His home, their home. One morning, he asked her to ride out with him to the far end of the property. She followed without question, the wind warm on her face, the field swaying golden beneath a blue sky. When they reached the ridge above the stream, she saw it, a small cabin newly built, nestled among wildflowers. He dismounted and looked at her, hands in his pockets, nervous like a boy. It's yours, he said, for whatever you want. A workshop, a clinic, a place of your own. I figured you should have something no one could ever take from you. She stared at the cabin, heart thudding. For so long, everything had been taken from her. Her parents, her dignity, her freedom. Now, here was something given without condition, without price. As they stood in the doorway of the little home, he turned to her, voice lower. I never bought you, he said. I never wanted to own you. I just wanted to protect you. Maybe even stay beside you if you'll let me. She looked up at him, eyes shining. Only if I get to keep bossing you around. He laughed, a full, deep laugh that filled the trees. That was never in question, he grinned. Later that evening, the sun began to dip below the hills. They rode out together, not as a stranger and a servant, not as a wounded man and a girl with no name, but as two souls who had fought their battles and chosen each other. The horses trotted side by side through tall grass lit gold by the setting sun. Her dress fluttered behind her like a banner. His hand brushed hers, briefly, softly, like a promise. And as they crested the hill, a gentle wind rustling the prairie below, her voice echoed quietly in the warm air. She was sold like property, but he made her royalty.